Good evening, and welcome to the American Family Association's weekly cable program. The AFA is a national organization devoted to strengthening the American family, the very foundation of our civilization. Tonight's topic is, the issue is choice. Two views on abortion and education. And our host, Frank Schroeder.
Hi, and thanks for joining us. One thing you're going to find out about the American Family Association, if you've never tuned into us before, or if you have, is that we don't avoid controversial topics. And to keep the programs lively, we try to get people with differing views. So if you see something on our program that you agree with or disagree with strongly, let us know. We may have you on the program. To keep with our philosophy, we're not avoiding a controversial program tonight. We decided to do a program on the topic of choice, and we wanted to discuss two very different aspects of choice: the right to choose abortion and the right to choose a school for your child. What's most interesting about these two aspects of choice is that generally the people who are pro-choice on abortion are anti-choice on education. And the people who are pro-life or anti-choice on abortion are pro-choice when it comes to education. That's the case with tonight's two guests. We often get ideas about whom to invite from letters to the editor, and we found such a guy in Peter Quinn, who graciously accepted our invitation to appear tonight. Peter is from West Islip, Long Island, and is registered in New York's Independence Party. He's an energy analyst with the Long Island Coalition for Democracy. Peter is a member of the Suffolk County Electrical Agency. He's pro-choice on abortion and anti-choice on education. Our other guest is Frank Russo from Port Washington. Frank is on the executive committee of the Nassau Conservative Party and heads the Respect Life Committee at St. Peter of Alcantara Parish. Frank, with an electrical engineering background, was a former division manager with AT&T and with New York Telephone Company. Frank is pro-choice on education and anti-choice on abortion. Joining me in the questioning is Patty Knapp.
Thank you, Frank, and welcome again, gentlemen. This is a very interesting topic, so we'll get right to it. Peter, we'll start with you, and then Frank will turn to you. In answer to the question, how do you feel about a parent's right to choose education for their child in terms of vouchers, school choice? Peter?
Well, I have been, excuse me, I have been anti-choice when it comes to public education for a long time. Our own state constitution very simply puts it in terms of Article 11, Section 1, that there shall be a system of free, meaning open, public schools. Nowhere does it say that, and it means that they will support it with funding. Nowhere does it say in that Constitution that we shall fund non-public or private or parochial institutions. And we've seen an erosion, in my view, of money that goes directly to public education through things like charter schools, which Governor Pataki pushed for 5 years ago, and for which there are now 43 charter schools using over $80 million of taxpayer dollars for charter schools, most of which, by the way, are K through 2 schools, the least expensive form of public education. And similarly, there are efforts to promote vouchers, saying that $3,000 will enable a parent of a child to send that child to any school of the parent's choice. And yet we know that there are private schools that charge $25,000 for tuition. How much or how well would a parent be able, with $3,000, to get their children into such elite kinds of institutions? I think it would be somewhat unlikely. Of course, there are private and parochial schools that charge less, but in any case, what we're really talking about is money, with a subtle religious overtone that suggests that in this world of equality, that we must provide a sizable portion of our tax dollars. I think if the public knew that for public education, they were actually spending money to accommodate these private and parochial institutions with transportation, school books, and the like, they might be more opposing the idea of spending their tax dollars for that purpose.
Okay, now Frank, I know you'll want to address a few points that Peter made.
Okay. The Supreme Court finally, the United States Supreme Court finally ruled on the constitutional issue, certainly from a federal perspective, that there's no constitutional objection to school choice. In New York State and in a number of other states, there's something known as the Blaine Amendment, which has its history, as both liberals and conservatives acknowledge, in anti-Catholicism of the 19th century. So the Blaine Amendment was passed by some 35 states, named after U.S. Senator James Blaine, a bigot, an anti-Catholic bigot. And again, like I say, liberals and conservatives both acknowledge the anti-Catholic history of this. Parental choice in education really is dealing with one of the most fundamental rights that any parent has, the right to guide his or her child's education. The state of New York, as all states, decided that education is in the best interest of society, have an educated population. And so it decided to tax the people and pay for this. And the only question is, must you be obligated to pick a government school, or should you be able to pick any school that meets the state requirements with regard to what the state's interests are, the teaching of math, English, history, and science? If I choose to teach my child math, English, history, and science in a school that has a crucifix, that's my business, not anyone else's business. A bigot might object, but that's too bad. As long as the school is doing what is called for by the state, the instruction in math, English, history, and science, that's sufficient. I don't want any extra money. I don't want a $3,000 voucher either. New York State, we're spending $12,000 per pupil. I'd say the voucher eventually should reach at least 75% of that amount, or $9,000, which would probably mean $8,000 per elementary school child and $11,000 per public school child. That would average out to $9,000, or 3/4 of the public school cost. There are three arguments: moral, educational, and economic. Moral, this is the most fundamental right of a parent, to guide his or her child's education. If they want moral values taught, they don't want condoms handed out, and they don't want certain hedonistic values taught, some of which are taught in today's public schools, that should be up to the parent to decide what's to be taught. Second is the educational. The history from numerous now voucher trials in Cleveland and especially in Milwaukee, where it's been trialed for 12 years, is that the students who are shifted benefit. They clearly benefit. The results improve after 4 years, 3-4 years. The results dramatically show improvement in the kids who opt out of the public schools. What also happens is after 6 or 7 years, the public schools, recognizing they no longer have a protective monopoly here, they start improving too. So everyone stands to benefit. And the final argument is economic. If you do this for $9,000, you're saving the taxpayers some money. And polls show that substantially half of all parents would probably shift out of the public schools, and this would be a tremendous savings to the taxpayers, some of which would be given back to the taxpayers. The other dollars could be given back to the public schools to even spend more on their pupils.
That's very impressive. Peter, how would you respond to that? Because Frank's raising the point that it's not just religion that people are choosing other schools for, but educational issues.
Well, I have no quarrel with the notion that the public parents have a right to choose the appropriate education for their children. However, I disagree respectfully that they do not have a right to take a sizable portion of monies that are spent by taxpayers for public education and remove that from that setting to accommodate either religious or private institutions.
But what if the public setting is failing and people are dissatisfied with it?
Well, that's the myth. You know, if we took Long Island, for example, several years ago, Coopers and Lybrand did a report for the Long Island Association, and they compared Long Island with 10 other regions of the country. And they found out, although the conclusions they drew was that the schools were failing, inside that report they indicate, and I was one of the few people who probably read that report, I can tell you that they said Long Island schools have the greatest number of students being admitted to four-year colleges compared to the other 10 regions of the country. They have the smallest number of dropouts, and they have the greatest test results on SAT, verbal, and math tests. In addition, we've seen recently in the last few years that the Intel Science tests always report the greatest percentage per student population of winners right here on Long Island. I think that's a testament to the fact that our schools on Long Island are not failing. Are there individual school districts who have failed? Yes. I mean,
just one point that
Sure.
Frank brought up. You had mentioned that you saw a constitutional problem with school choice and vouchers. Frank's point that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that this is constitutional. How do you respond to that?
The state constitution, I'll defer to that, does not make any mention of money being used for other than public education. And I'll reemphasize that. I think that's critical
But the
to
US
our
Supreme,
discussion.
the U.S. Supreme Court, do you even find that to be
they-
dispositive on the issue?
Well, they've said that the voucher system is a way, but I don't want to see 3,000 transformed to 6, transformed to 9, and the next thing you see is
So
an
you say zero. Give them zero, and then we don't have to worry about the problem?
Yeah, I'm a fiscal conservative. I want to pay my taxes for what I choose to spend money on. If the state constitution says I must spend it on public education, I'm very supportive. But I am not supportive. I figure any parent has the right to spend any amount of money they want on tuition, but they should not accept the notion or expect that the rest of the taxpayers must subscribe to that religious view.
Yeah, the state constitution is not, only the Blaine Amendment is relevant here, and the Blaine Amendment is a historically bigoted amendment. The fact the state does many things that are not in the Constitution. It doesn't have to be in the Constitution. Look, we decided that we're going to take care of elderly people with regard to health care. We provide billions, tens, hundreds of billions in Medicare expenditures, hundreds of billions on Medicaid for the poor. We don't tell these people, you must pick a government-run hospital. You should be able to pick any hospital you choose. You're not going to get more money. You'll get the same fixed amount of money, but you're free to pick any accredited hospital. The poor person gets food stamps. You don't have to go to a government store to spend these food stamps. If you are Jewish and you want to go to a kosher food store, that's your business. You should be able to use food stamps at the kosher store. If you want to go to a Catholic hospital, you're entitled to do that. Education's even more important because you're forming the minds and characters of young people. I don't like giving these hedonists and secular humanists the power to tell us, you must pick the government secular humanist run school. You should be able to pick any school you want. Yes, Long Island schools are well run. And let the parents then pick the public schools in Long Island if they so choose. I have no problem with that. And I don't want to give $3,000 vouchers again. In Long Island, we spend $16,000 per pupil. I'd want to therefore give $12,000 to the kids in Long Island. That's about $14,000 for high school, which, my God, is 3 times what they're spending in the private schools now, the religious schools, and maybe give $10,000 for elementary school.
Well, believe it or not, speaking of numbers, we've handled about one question here, and we're halfway through the program. We're glad that you tuned in, though. The American Family Association presents. Please stay tuned for this very important public service announcement.
Too bad, no, was it?
Thanks for tuning in to the American Family Association Presents. My name is Frank Schroeder. We're taking a look tonight at a very controversial topic of choice, abortion and school choice. With us here are Peter Quinn and Frank Russo, Patty Knapp joining me in the questions. We've just taken a look at the issue of choice as it refers to school choice. We now want to delve into another area, and that's the issue of abortion. So why don't I start with you this time, Frank, and why don't you tell us your position on the issue of abortion and the reason for that
Right.
position?
In a free society, we want to maximize the opportunity for choice. You should always have an opportunity to make any choice you want, so long as it doesn't harm another. The issue of abortion centers on when does human life begin. Now, I know for a fact that theologians throughout millennia, 2,000, 3,000 years, have differed on when human life begins. Some believe it begins at conception, Catholics, Christians. Some believe it begins at quickening, I think the Jewish people, maybe the Muslims. Different people, different theologians have different views on when, quote, ensoulment takes place, when the soul is placed in the human body, if there is a soul. Philosophers have always differed. We know that lawyers have differed. My God, have they differed. Not 2 centuries ago, the lawyers in this country told us that black people were not human beings. They were not persons as defined by the Constitution. So lawyers have differed as to when personhood begins. The one area where I know of no distinction, not one, is in the area of science. Every scientist acknowledges that a new human life has one point of beginning and one point only. That's at the moment of conception or fertilization. When the sperm and the ovum unite, from that point on, nothing else needs to be done. That is a new human entity with specific DNA. And so, because that's a new human life, my position is you never have the right to harm another, unless your life is at stake. I mean, if your life is threatened, if you have an ectopic pregnancy, and you're going to die because that fetus is growing in the fallopian tube, an operation to...
As would the infant.
Yes, then you're performing an operation to remove that part of the fallopian tube, which otherwise would kill you. That is permissible self-defense.
But that's very rare, of course.
But other than that, you have no right to harm an innocent human being. And the issue is, when does human life begin? That's the focus. I'll be brief on that so we can move on.
Peter, how about you? What's your position on the issue of choice, abortion?
I believe that women should have the right to choose. I think that this has become a religious kind of effort and political effort on the part of conservatives and the religious right to maintain dominance and control over women.
When you say the right to choose what?
I'm sorry, I missed the point.
No, you said that women should have the right to choose.
The right to choose
what?
whether to have an abortion or to carry that baby. The right to have an abortion, it seems to me.
So to carry the baby or kill the baby?
I didn't say kill the baby. No. What I'm saying is that our Bill of Rights provides freedom of conscience. And that's embedded in the Bill of Rights. While we have a federal constitution that enables various religions to be tolerated and to have all kinds of religion participate in our societal process, it doesn't say that one religion should dominate. I mean, we know that, for example, in Utah, the Mormon religion dominates that society. No elected official would get there without the support of the Mormons. But I can foresee a time, and this is my major concern, when religion dictates our government. I mean, for example, in Iraq, we just solved the war there, and there were 3 dominant territorial groups. The Kurds to the north, who disagreed with the Ba'aths under the control of the dictator Saddam Hussein, and the Shiites. And they are territorial groups, but religion dominates with a cleric appointed to control the views of the citizens and make them subservient to the citizen point of
But
view.
now, Peter, could you address Frank's point about life beginning at conception, that no scientist differs with that? Do you believe that abortion is killing an unborn child?
Well, I've always doubted that the notion of killing is if, for example, I could argue that we went to war with Iraq on spurious grounds,
let's stay on
and there were
abortion.
over 140 Americans killed plus thousands
Well,
of others.
let's stay on the abortion issue.
Well,
If she's pregnant, is there not a life?
not always. If a baby is carried midway through its to fruition and it has no brain, how do you justify saying that the mother must be obligated to carry that baby to full term? My view would be that that should be the option of the parents in making a decision to abort that baby.
How about the healthy baby that's perfectly healthy? Should the woman have the right to?
And I think there are economic circumstances that dictate what should be the determination. Parents have to.
So health is not dispositive. Physical health.
That is not the overriding and overwhelming issue. There are other factors to take into consideration, and it's not limited just to the health factor.
I want to give Frank a chance to comment on your position.
Sure.
Religious fanatics, are they the only people who care about the
No,
pro-life
I mean,
position?
it's a matter of conscience. You never have, if there's a man that I know who was arrested, he's in jail now for killing an abortion doctor. His conscience told him that he should shoot this doctor. He was wrong. Thank God, you know, there you can count them on the fingers of one hand where they act that way, but simply because you have to make society has to make good judgments. If there is human life there, no one has the right to take innocent human life. Suppose the baby's already born and has no brain or is brain dead. Should we be able to kill that child, Peter? Would you say we should be able to kill that child?
Without a brain?
After birth.
If it's a child that's brain dead, you
It's
know,
born.
it's
After
born,
birth.
it's alive, or say he's got Down syndrome, or he's got some serious illness, should we be entitled to put that life out of existence? I mean, is that? Let me show you this. Let me ask you this: does that look like human life to you? That's an 11-week-old fetus, 11-week healthy fetus. Does that look like human life to you? In your
Not
judgment?
to me, no.
This is not human life to you.
Not at that stage.
All right, so you look at this and you'd say that's not human life.
I'd say that
That's
a
interesting.
woman bearing a child should not be controlled and dominated either by religion or a male-oriented society.
Not by religion or male-oriented society, but for Pete's sake, if there's a human life there, suppose the woman has a child that's disobedient, and this mother wants to put the kid's hand in scalding water. Should she be entitled to do that just because it's her child?
What we know about many parents is that they don't care for their children after they are born, and as a result, we often see abused children in our society. How do we overcome that?
Abuse. Do you know that child abuse has risen 300% since abortion was legalized?
That was
That's a
an
phony
argument. That
It's a
was an
phony-
argument for
that's what
legalizing
they said. What you
abortion.
just said is what the pro-abortionists said in the early 70s. Child abuse has skyrocketed since abortion because the country as a whole has sanctioned the taking of innocent human life.
I think it
and you're
has nothing-
sanctioning it. You're sanctioning the taking of innocent human
What's
life.
your position?
I
Peter?
think it has nothing to do with Roe versus Wade. I think it has everything to do with other changes in our society, economic changes that have impacted on, I mean, the fact that we've got 6 million people unemployed and who are struggling to make ends meet. You know, they still have bear children and don't have the economic means to care for those children.
What struck me is that you looked at that fetus, that 11-week fetus, whose heart was beating from the first month, brain waves detected
Well,
in the
you've got a
second month.
piece of plastic in your hand.
Right, this image here of an 11-week, it's a life-size model of a human fetus at 11 weeks. Heart beating since the 25th day, brain waves since the 43rd day. It's a human life by any scientific stretch. I'm not talking about religious views or any other views, but just as we protected the slave, we understood we were doing an injustice to slaves. We're doing an injustice to millions of unborn children now.
Let me give Peter a chance to address a question to Frank on this issue. Any question that you find problematic of what he said on the issue of abortion? Any question that you want to ask him?
I'm trying to recall the things that he said, but right now, can't come up with any.
Okay. Maybe either that or Peter on the issue of education or abortion. Any question that you would want to ask Frank on either of those 2 points?
Yes, currently on Long Island, the poorest school districts spend roughly $11,000 and struggle to do that. In contrast, the richest districts on Long Island are spending over $20,000 per pupil to educate their children. And what we know is that the wealthier school districts always have the greatest admission to college, the most success in educating their children. And what we find is that the poorest school districts, and by the way, those are poor minority school districts like Wyandanch and Riverhead.
What's your question for Frank?
And the question is, what do we do to aid the poorest school districts to improve the quality of their education?
Yeah. So you're making a supposition that I feel is entirely wrong, and there is a large number of studies that prove that there's no correlation between spending and quality of education. What happens is the affluent communities, those families are very keenly interested in education. They happen to be affluent and they're keenly interested in education, and their kids are going to do great whether we spend $20,000 or $15,000. They think by spending more it's better, and they might win a few more Intel scholarships and so forth because they put money into those programs. The problem is not spending when the difference is, you know, $12,000 versus $14,000 versus $16,000. That's very little of the case. The real difference has to do with the family's attitudes. And again, what the basic factor in America that's made America so great is competition. What the public schools need is competition. And for the city students, that's especially important. In the suburbs, it's a tax question, it's a cost question. If we spend, in my community, we're spending $19,000 per pupil. If we made a voucher available for half that, $9,500, $9,000 for elementary, $11,000 for high school, we could allow kids to go, save the taxpayers money, let them pick schools that will do just as good a job as our fine schools in Port Washington, and save the taxpayers millions of dollars in Port Washington, and the same goes for all of Long Island. It's a tax issue. I think we could save a lot of money in the suburbs. In the city, it's an educational
last
issue.
10 seconds, you get the last word.
Okay. There's more to it than competition. Some towns give money, tax rebates and so on, to other companies.
Peter, I'm sorry, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm getting the high